Welcome to PTI, boys and girls. I'm Sam Mulberry, and I'm joined by...
I'm Amy Poppinga, and we are introducing you to your summer experience in CWC. So we are going to be doing webisodes each week to help you stay on top of the content, to provide a format for review, to discuss kind of key issues from the week, and to sort of, in a very timely way, tie things that are happening in the course to whatever happens to be going on with current events.
So what is this course? What is CWC?
So CWC stands for Christianity and Western Culture, and Christianity and Western Culture has a long history at Bethel. I think the course has existed for...
since like 1985. So.
And I mean, I'm not going to do the math on that, but that's a long time ago.
Were you alive in 1985?
I mean,
just barely.
Yeah,
though, right?
indeed. You and I both were alive in 1985. But CWC, Christianity and Western Culture, is sort of the foundation of Bethel's general education curriculum. So at Bethel, here where you're getting a full liberal arts experience, which is part of the reason I think that we hope students choose Bethel, Christianity and Western Culture serves as a foundation and really a launching point before you sort of begin taking on other courses within the general education curriculum.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're going to be doing in this class is really taking a kind of broad view of Western history, which means we're going to start back about 500 years before Christ, looking at the ancient Greeks and going all the way up into the 20th century. But it's not just a Western Civ course. Maybe you took a course like a European history class or a Western Civ class in high school. What makes this unique is the Christianity and Western culture. So what does that mean?
Right. So what that means is even though we are going to start, as you just mentioned, we're going to start the course long before Christianity, what we're going to be doing is asking questions and exploring important figures in the development of the history of Christianity. So we need to sort of say, well, what does the world look like, and what has influenced the world when Christ sort of emerges onto the scene, and then how is the world then shaped by that as that story plays out? And while the story that we're going to be telling is that of the story of Christianity within Western development, it by no means means that Christianity isn't going to grow and to have an influence in other parts of the world. It's just that this particular class, that's sort of the trajectory that we're going to follow.
So why do you think studying the West is important?
Well, I think studying the West is important because we live in the West. So we are influenced by this. Our culture is very much influenced by it. Whether or not you were born in the West, we are all certainly shaped by and products of Western culture. And so when we look at things like our current cultural systems, our political systems, our history, the way we even approach, I think, the expression of our own Christianity, we need to recognize that in ways both hard and soft, we are influenced by the West. And the better that we understand that, I think the better that we understand not only kind of what's happening in in our country right now, but in the world right now. And also, I think for me, again, one of the most valuable parts is really the ways in which studying how Christianity developed in a particular cultural context really makes me much more aware of the fact that for all of us, our faith expression is in some ways shaped by our culture and our history and our point in time. And I think that's a beautiful thing, but it also is a good sort of self-reflective check to say, I don't own the way Christianity gets expressed. It's always being shaped by what's happening around it.
Yeah, and I think one last objective to the course, which has been part of the course since 1985, since the beginning, is also sort of a personal interaction with it. That to one degree, we hope that you maybe find some of your roots in this story, maybe direct roots or even sort of a sense of connection to the broader Christian story, to broader Christian history. One of the things I always talk about when I teach this course during fall and spring is looking for those moments of resonance. When you read something that just like, you kind of feel that hum in your chest of like, something that this person is saying really resonates.
Yeah, and I think it is for some of you students, this may be a unique experience to think about, well, how does my Christian identity actually have a heritage, and how does it have sort of a sense of, quote, family history? And one of the things that I think is cool is I have found in my years at Bethel, increasingly we have students who don't come from kind of like long a long tradition of having like a Christian family. So what I like about that is that whether you identify as being Christian and that's like you're the only person in your family that does, or whether it is kind of like a family legacy thing, our Christian heritage and the story of Christianity's development is for all of us to be able to embrace. And I think that's sort of, grounded in Christ's own words about the idea of like that our identity is found in Christ, and that means that we're the inheritors of what Christ, brings into the world. But I actually really like that because for me, even though I love family heritage, I have never had a family that was very interested in it, and so that's something I've always wanted to kind of find some security in, is sort of like, what's my family history? And that hasn't always worked in the literal kind of ethnic and cultural sense, but it's very much become important to me in this spiritual and religious sense. And so the story that we're telling, for good and bad, because all stories have both, this is, if you identify as Christian or a Christ follower, like, this is our story, this is our heritage, and I think that that's a really cool thing to understand.
So it's not just Christianity and Western culture, but it's online CWC.
Yes.
So I think it's worth thinking about this as an online course.
Yeah.
So we've been teaching this online since the summer of 2013, so this will be year 7.
Year 6 for me.
Yeah.
Year 7
of teaching this course. So
I mean, there was this point in time where I think it was like, is this going to work? And it was like, we got to bring in somebody to help.
That's right.
Help
You
this
really did
ship.
save this.
I did. Yeah.
So what's unique about teaching this course? Because you've taught this for a long time in semester. What's unique about teaching this course or taking this course online?
Yeah, I think at first I was a skeptic to the idea that we could do something online that I think would have the value that I think the face-to-face interaction does. However, I've come to really appreciate certain aspects of what we do in the online format. I think that number one, it's convenient for students. It's helpful for students for a variety of reasons. I'm sure each of you that's chosen to take this online is doing it for a different reason. And it's great that we can offer this to you to be a help in kind of your regular course planning in a format that will work better for you. I like that we actually get to kind of stop and really sit in certain themes and in certain moments of content that we tend to have to just kind of keep moving during the semester. So even though it's in a condensed period of time, I actually think we get to go a bit deeper into certain topics that I think are really interesting. I mean, I was thinking about this morning. I think online CWC is sort of like, it's like CWC the cruise. And so we are going to, we have an itinerary for you, and we navigate that together, and there's certain points where we're like, here's exactly what we're doing at the moment. And yet at the same time, some of the formats that we've created to provide the content, the documentary style films that you will be watching, the museums, the interactive museums that you will be engaging with, they actually do kind of function like you do on a cruise, where it's, okay, here's the itinerary, but you get to make day trips, and you get to decide which, what speaker you're going to go and hear, what museum you want to linger in. And so those are some of the things I like about the online format, is we're kind of wholly invested in the course. I'm not teaching anything else, you're not teaching anything else, and so it is a little bit like being on a trip together, and you can kind of sit in the content in a different way than you can in the midst of the regular semester.
So I think there is that depth, but there's also a breadth.
Yes.
There are things we get to cover in summer that we don't get to cover in semester, and it's because of things like those museums. So one of the things you'll notice, especially as you get deeper in the course, is there's this ability to make some choices. Sometimes we'll say, here's 3 paths you can go down. Follow one of these. Follow the one that interests you the most. That's not something we can do in a face-to-face course. So before we move on from thinking about this online, what advice do you have for students in terms of, now that you've worked with students in this course for a number of years, what advice do you have?
Yeah, so the advice I have is that some of you may have taken multiple classes online. Others of you, this may be your very first experience with the class online, and there is a learning curve, and it does take time to adjust to it. 3 main things I would say is, number 1, follow the schedule. Do not get behind. Some online courses are designed where it's sort of like, well, as long as you turn all these things in by the end, doesn't sort of really matter at what pace you work. That does not work in this class. You really need to follow the schedule. It's very easy to get behind, and so you really need to pay attention to when things are due, and to not let the work pile up. You need to have this kind of sounds silly, but it's very pragmatic and practical. You need good internet access. So if you're going to be traveling, or if you're going to have a work schedule that is going to prevent you from having frequent access to the internet, that's something you're going to need to get that figured out, and you're going to need to talk to us ASAP, because one of the things we say in this course is, again, this is not a course where you can check out for a week, or you can not do things for a couple of days. It's just not going to work well in that respect. I think number 3 is give yourself the time. So before we get to our first exam, some of you have probably never taken an exam online, and before we get to it, we will prep you and help you through how to best prepare for that. But I think the main thing is you need to give yourself the time. And again, like, think about when you're doing things like watching a film or going into one of our museums, the way you would actually approach those things. You can't go to the theater and rush through a film. You can't go to a museum and say, we're going to knock this out in 20 minutes. So you need to make sure that you're giving yourself ample time, and in order to really get oriented to what it means to study and to learn in this particular format.
So we've talked about sort of 2/3 of the course. We talked about the documentary films a little bit. We talked about the museums a little bit. Then we have these webisodes. What are we doing here? What is the purpose of these? What function do they fill?
You know, they fulfill the function, I mean, put sort of simply, they fulfill the function of giving you some more interaction with us. We are real people. We see you as real people, and we film these live every week. And so we aren't just regurgitating things that we've done from the past. We want you to know that we are, it's real. It's a real thing that we're all experiencing. And so each week we think about what's been happening during the midst of the week. We make comments on things we've observed in the course. So it's another point of engagement between the professors and you, and it's a point of engagement between the professors and each other. We all team teach this course together during the regular year, and so we want to kind of model the ways in which we engage with questions and banter around the material in the real course. But they also are a learning tool. So these aren't just there as like bonus content. These are here to help with. We do review activities. We highlight important things that, again, we've observed from the week in terms of the work that you are doing. We will really draw out and expand upon certain themes or certain questions that we want to make sure that you're paying attention to and understand. And then as we approach especially our exams, we use the webisodes as a place to help sort of talk through and prepare you for what that's going to look like.
Right, and this is the one part of the course that is live. I mean, we live, so to speak. I mean,
yes.
the other pieces, the museums, the films we made a few years ago, we re-record these every summer. So this really is the point, you use the word interactive. So if you're emailing your professors, email us if you have things you want us to talk about, things you want us to explain. So in the face-to-face course, you would be part of a small group where you would meet with that professor in a small group. So this sort of functions as that. One interactive piece that we should talk about, because this actually applies to your first assignment for the course, is discussion boards, right? So we have we're going to come out of a lot of these webisodes with a discussion board question for you to really interact with each other. So do you know what our first discussion board question is?
Yes, so we are going to be asking you to introduce, you're going to do one discussion board posting, but it sort of has two components to it. So you're going to introduce us to yourself. So you're going to tell us a little bit about who you are, what your sort of experience is at Bethel. Some of you have been at Bethel for a few years. Some of you are coming to Bethel in the fall, and maybe that is you're in your first semester of college. Some of you are maybe transferring into Bethel. So you're going to tell us a little bit about who you are, what you enjoy, kind of typical background information, but then you're also going to tell us what your experience is with online courses. So have you taken an online course before? Why are you taking this course online? How are you feeling about it? Some of you might think online courses are great. Some of you might be nervous. So it helps us as well, because then we kind of get a better sense of, okay, how much do we need to kind of emphasize or explore the difficulties of being in an online environment. So these webisodes really are a touch point with you. They kind of hang out there like anchors, because each week we'll be connecting things. As I was watching old webisodes this morning, I've noticed that like my hair will change 3 or 4 times during the course of the next couple weeks, and luckily Chris and Sam are going to look exactly the same. So it's just,
so
you will be our constant.
Right, and I would say when you post a discussion board, it's easy to make that feel like you're posting that for us to read, but you're posting it for everyone
each other,
to read. So
yeah.
make sure you read each other, especially this first one. This is where you're getting to know who your classmates are. So go to the discussion boards. When this is done, answer those 2 questions. We will be right back to introduce the third member of our team.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the second segment of our very first webisode. And reminder, I am Amy Poppinga, and I am joined by...
Sam Mulberry. Wait, no.
No.
Very easy mistake to make, though.
Polo shirt.
That's how you tell the
Sam
difference.
is sweater vest.
Exactly. So
Yes.
I'm Chris Gehrz. I'm the third member of this team. Like Amy and Sam, I teach in the history department at Bethel, and I've been teaching CWC for quite some time
Yes.
now.
How long have you been teaching CWC?
I just finished my 16th year at Bethel, which
Okay.
means, 16 years of CWC.
I was thinking about this morning, and this is the first class that I taught, so I think, and that was in 2005, so.
Oh, not far behind.
No.
Of course, Sam has lapped all of us, but
He
we'll
has
get into that
indeed.
in future
Yeah.
webisodes.
Yeah.
So in the second segment of our weekly webisodes, we'll lighten things up, play a game, which is fun. Everyone loves
fun.
games,
Everyone
right?
loves games.
But also may be useful because it's a way for us, I think, to, once we get into it, review material.
Yes.
And sometimes there'll be kind of vocab things. Often it'll be bigger concepts,
Yep.
significances, I think is a big, especially early on, we're trying to help you understand why we're focusing on certain ideas. Usually what we'll do in the second webisode of each unit is do kind of an exam review game where we think back over 6 to 10 big vocab terms from the unit. Of course, we're at the beginning of the whole
Right,
experience.
so
There's
what
nothing to
vocab
review right
terms?
now. So what we want to
People.
do is to set up an idea that you'll see in the first documentary film, which is taken from Hebrews chapter 12, where the writer says that we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. And the writer is referring back to the Old Testament, to some of the men and women of faith of the Hebrew scriptures. But I think a core idea of CWC is that we're filling in that cloud of witnesses, right? And so we each have people that we talk about in this class who really speak to us, who encourage us, challenge us, convict us, sometimes horrify us.
Yes, yeah.
Sometimes they're people we just disagree with, across the centuries. But I think that's one of our goals of the course, is that you will come away with people for your cloud of witnesses. Hint, there's a chance this will be a question on your last assignment, so you can start taking notes now. So to model that idea, Amy, we are going to play a game that we like to call Heads on Sticks. And we're going to do some acting here. We're going to play the roles of contemporary people from America in 2019. And I think the overriding question is, who is in this person's cloud of witnesses?
Yes.
So I think I will play first. Amy,
Okay.
who am I?
Oh my goodness. Hello, Steph Curry.
Well, glad I could be here. I should be getting ready for the NBA Finals, but I'm glad I could take some time. So as you probably know, I play for the Golden State Warriors. I'm a decently gifted basketball player, and I've got some natural gifts, but you probably know I have an intense regimen of practice.
Yes.
That shooting touch did not just come to me because my dad was Del Curry. I've worked hard my whole life. I take 1,000 shots every week in practice. And before every single game, I've got this elaborate routine that includes dribbling drills, but also I take about 200 shots before each game. And I keep pushing myself. You can get 3 points if you take a 22, 23-foot shot. I like 25, 28, 32, 40. I keep pushing myself further and further. And that's how I've made myself the NBA star that I am. What you might not know is I'm also a devout Christian. And I think many of my spiritual heroes of faith also push themselves. They are athletes in a sense as well. So I think of someone like St. Anthony, who was born in the 3rd century AD in Egypt, in North Africa. And St. Anthony is a founder of what's called monasticism. And I know, Amy, you'll talk a lot about this in online CWC, but these are Christians who want a disciplined, dedicated life of really spiritual striving, right? And so I give up my wealthy inheritance, I embrace poverty, and I never get married, I never have a family. I go to the desert, I go to the wilderness, and I fast, and I pray, and I memorize scripture, and I struggle with spiritual warfare. And throughout over 100 years of life, I keep pushing myself further and further because it's how Anthony keeps pushing himself further and further because he sees himself as a spiritual athlete, kind of like how Paul talks about in his epistles. And so as a Christian and as a professional athlete, I really embrace that idea that the Christian walk is not passive, it's active, and it requires us to push ourselves further and further to grow closer and closer to God.
Wow, that was inspiring
Well,
stuff. Wow.
That's what I'm here for.
And I mean, for all the 5th graders out there who are going to write a book report about Steph Curry this summer, you're set. You're all ready to go. All right. Oh, who am I?
Well, I don't know all the Chris's, but I think this is Chris Pratt, right?
Yes, that's right. I am Chris Pratt. May I just say that Gehrz, you are my 6th favorite Chris.
Glad I made the list. You've had a good summer, Chris Pratt.
I've had an excellent summer. My career has just sort of been on an upward trajectory for the last several years. You may recognize me from my really breakout role in Parks and Recreation, which I think is going to be a cult classic for years to come. You can watch all 6 seasons on Netflix.
Did it last summer.
Yeah, if you are interested.
Are you in Marvel movies too?
I am in Marvel movies. So, and that's kind of where I want to tie this to sort of how my role in Marvel has made me think about what's important in terms of understanding like Christian witness and Christian history.
Do tell.
So yes, so you may recognize me from my role in Guardians of the Galaxy, or maybe you have seen most recently, no spoilers, but the our last Avengers film.
Blah, 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 blah. Just kidding.
That came out this summer. But one of the things I really value about my role in Guardians of the Galaxy is the ways in which it sort of broke the mold of what a superhero is supposed to be and what a superhero is supposed to look like. So I have not been gifted with any particular type of superhuman strength, but rather I kind of broke the mold for being the everyman's superhero in many respects. And for that reason, one of my favorite people in the cloud of witnesses is probably going to be Martin Luther. So Martin Luther is a figure that maybe you've heard of him, maybe you actually come from the Lutheran tradition, but you're going to learn about Martin Luther's story and his very important role in sort of providing a wake-up call of sorts to what was the typical expression of Christianity in the late medieval period. And Martin Luther is going to say, is going to find much of what the church has decided to value in terms of emphasis on like human hierarchy, emphasis on the idea that we that humans cannot directly encounter God, but rather we have to obey certain systems that have been set in place for us, and those systems that are not achievable by people at different socioeconomic levels, people of different backgrounds, and he's essentially going to critique the church and he's going to break that mold. And there's going to be problems that come from that. And if there's one thing we've learned from Marvel movies, man, history repeats itself. And so we're going to have the same issues over and over. But what's actually sort of amazing about looking at Christian history is the ways in which new superheroes emerge. And so we have to constantly fight against sort of the evil of human nature and our own corruption, but that like, we're just going to have to keep on doing this as long as the fans keep watching.
All right, fair enough. Amy, who am I?
Oh, I
think I'm Franklin Graham.
Oh,
right?
you are Franklin Graham. I'm sorry.
I got a face everyone remembers.
Yes.
You might have heard of my dad, Billy.
Yes.
And so, like, I'm trying to keep up the family business. Now, Amy Poppinga, I've got to ask you, are you busy on June 2nd?
Yes.
No, you are not. Because every right-thinking American Christian needs to join me on June 2nd to pray for our president, Donald J. Trump.
Okay.
Now,
I will be on a beach in Hawaii, but I will remember to
join
do that.
in because, as you know, the Bible says to do this. Paul says in a couple of his epistles we should pray for those in authority over us, but specifically, I think we need to pray that God would protect and strengthen President Trump because he has sent Donald Trump to help protect Christianity and traditional values in this culture. And as Christians, I believe we ought to use political authorities in that way. And so I'm really drawn to a couple of figures from the cloud of witnesses. The Emperor Constantine, who converts to Christianity in the 4th century, stops the persecution of the church, and really privileges the church. He gives it wealth and status and power and influence. And so I really find myself drawn to someone like the historian Eusebius, who I think you're going to read sometime in the first unit, because Eusebius watches this and says that God is acting through Constantine, that God uses Constantine as a kind of heavenly messenger. And even though Constantine sometimes does things that don't seem very Christian, he's a fierce warrior and he's a political deal maker, God can still work through that. And maybe we don't need our leaders to be especially moral as long as they do the work of the church. And I think you'll see that when you read Eusebius. Remember, June 2nd, pray for Donald Trump.
Wow. Thank you, Franklin. That was amazing.
He says you're welcome. Hey!
Yes. Oh, who am I?
Kind of struck by this one. I don't understand. He looks almost as handsome as Chris Pratt.
Looking good. World's 6th most
I think he
famous.
needs to shave a little bit more.
Yes.
Closely.
I think that was a sabbatical, Chris Gehrz.
I'm
Chris Gehrz.
Taking it easy.
Yes.
Yep.
So I'm Chris Gehrz. I am a Bethel professor. I am, as I've already mentioned to you, I'm a professor in the history department. I'm a professor of European history. And so I also, one of the things that really draws me to, I mean, when I came to Bethel, I had no previous exposure to Bethel. I didn't understand what the Baptist General Conference was, or what is now called Converge. But I don't know, I grew up in a denomination in the covenant tradition that is something of a cousin, second cousin.
Sure, yeah.
Yes, I'm the one that says,
I think Chris told me they're the
sure.
dry Baptists. Is that close enough?
Yes, but really, I think that has resonated with me within the Converge tradition is its roots in the Swedish Baptist Pietist movement. What is Pietism? Students be asking yourself, well, Bethel is a school that has its roots in this Pietist tradition, and this is a tradition that we are going to study. It's not going to happen for a couple of weeks, but the Pietist tradition, which again has its roots in this sort of in Europe, and we will discuss the different groups that follow Pietism and how that's going to make its way over to North America. But I think a simple understanding of what Pietism is saying it's just as important how we ask questions as the specific questions that we're asking. And what does it mean to say, okay, well, we're not going to agree on everything. And again, like, we are shaped by our time and our culture and our context. So what do we focus on in terms of how do we live together as people who are Christ followers? And that's something that we're going to see come out in different ways as different figures in the study of Christianity and Western culture. While they're not going to call themselves pietists, there's a model of how people begin to sort of ask these particular questions in their particular environment. And so I think one of the people that holds value to me, I mean, on the one hand, you're going to meet actual pietists like Philip Jakob, that's what I meant. I knew it was Spader, but I thought, yes. Who are going to actually sort of, who are going to parse out and articulate what pietism means. But I actually think even though they're not pietists, you're going to be introduced to some important Catholic thinkers who are, I think of Ignatius of Loyola or Teresa of Avila, who are going to say, what does it mean to live out our Christian faith in this particular time? And what does that mean in terms of how do we draw contrast between the way we're doing it and how other Christians are doing it? Can't wait.
Chris Gehrz guy has a lot to say about pietism.
He does.
I don't know what to make of that. Amy, who am I?
Oh, wow.
Glad we could get Amy Poppinga. She's hard to pin down sometimes.
She is.
Amy Poppinga, I am a professor at Bethel University. I'm a graduate of Bethel College, now University, from its history department and social studies program. I taught high school, and then I went back to school. And I was especially drawn to the study of Islam. As a Christian, I wanted to better understand one of the world's other major religions, and we'll be talking about the origins and development of Islam, its relationship with Christian Europe, especially in the second unit, I think. And I think our textbook does a pretty nice job of talking about how Islam relates to Christianity and Western culture. So as I think about who's in my cloud of witnesses, one person that comes to mind is Francis of Assisi, who's an Italian living in the 13th century, for two reasons. So Francis is best known for founding a new, really intense kind of monasticism, one that deeply embraces poverty to the point where Franciscans are mendicants, they beg, and it's a way of imitating Christ. But two other things Francis is known for. One is he actually goes to Egypt in the midst of the Crusades, and he tries to be a peacemaker. He tries to reach out as a Christian to Muslims. And as a Christian who does Islamic studies, I feel like it really highlights the importance of not just peacemaking, but hospitality, humility. I found that studying Islam is not just a way to love my religious neighbors, but maybe to understand Christianity a little bit better myself. And so I'm glad that we got a chance to study Islam here and there in CWC. Now, I also get to teach courses on environmental history, and I have students think about the relationship of human beings to the physical environment. We talk about trade and disease and climate. And interestingly, Francis is also, I think, dabbling in that area. He's famous for preaching to the birds, right? And there still are Franciscan blessings of animals. And he reminds us that we're just one part of God's creation, and so we should think about what our responsibility to the rest of creation would be.
I almost cried. That was beautiful.
Oh,
So,
Francis
who
is
am I?
powerful. Hey, we've seen him before.
We have. I'm Sam Mulberry. If there was a king of CWC,
Should be a sweater vest.
it would be.
Here
There
you go.
should. Yes, it would be me. So.
How long have you been teaching CWC, Sam Mulberry? It's like the mid-90s or so.
I have been 18 years.
Wow.
18 years. Some of you students might be 18. So that's pretty crazy to think about. No, but actually CWC is significant to my own life story. I came to Bethel as a freshman. I grew up in the Catholic tradition, and when I came to Bethel, I had planned on studying computer science, which I'm also extremely gifted at, by the way. But I took CWC as one of my required courses, and it truly changed my life. The professors that were teaching it, the ways in which they challenged us, but the learning about my own Christian history, thinking about the connections, thinking about the ways in which humankind has continued to wrestle with the same questions and the ways in which they continue to find answers. And so I actually I changed my major to history. I came back to Bethel after time in graduate school and took over the direction of the program, and I've been teaching CWC every semester since. And so I've found some of my very best friends through teaching CWC. But if I have to think about somebody that from the course who just, if I had to have like a CWC charm bracelet that maybe Amy Poppinga made for me, then who would be dangling from my CWC charm bracelet? Probably the first charm I would put on there would be my Augustine or Augustine charm. And so Augustine is a figure that we are going to encounter at the end of the first unit. And in a very personal story, as Augustine does not grow up in essentially a Christian home, although he has a parent who is a Christian, and we're going to learn the influence of his mother on his eventual choice to convert to Christianity. And I think sometimes something that Christians don't think about in the 21st century is the ways in which Christianity has multiple expressions throughout time as an individual choice and as an individual relationship with God and with Christ. And so what I love about Augustine is he's really one of the first figures that we encounter where we get to read his spiritual story of why he chose to become a Christian and the hope that it offered to him, and how personal it was for him, and how he wrestled really with what does it mean to be a sinful person and what does it mean to be forgiven. And so I'm not sure that I associate that story because I'm so sinful. My friends think I'm probably one of the least sinful people that they know. But what I find so special about it is the ways in which Augustine honestly answers these questions of how do you accept this idea of being loved when you look at the world around you and yourself and realize a lot of us are actually pretty bad. So yeah, but I love this course, and I truly mean that, and it gives me a lot of energy and enthusiasm, and I hope to be teaching it for a long time to come.
Yeah, Sam really does. And I think they're not vocab terms, but I would guess, Sam, your cloud of witnesses are some of the professors who shaped you, people like Kevin Craig and Neil Lettinga and Virginia Lettinga. And one thing that's distinctive about the online course is we've named the museums after.
Yeah.
So there's always a little, as you walk in the museum, you can learn more about those professors.
Yep.
Because, at least for me, one thing that's distinctive about teaching CWC is that it's this course that does go back almost 35 years, and I'm inheriting ideas, content. I feel like in some ways I'm a steward for things that other people have built.
And you will be encountering in those, as you mentioned, but in those in the films, you'll be encountering some of the founders of the course and influential teachers from the course. You'll be hearing from Professor Mike Holmes. You'll be hearing from Greg Boyd. You'll be hearing from Dan Ritchie. So what's cool is some of the professors are professors that still teach here. Maybe you've had them already. Maybe you'll be exposed to them and think, I want to take a course from that person, particularly the ones in the history department, for example.
They're friendly.
Yes, but think of me as I don't know, if Amy Poppinga is sort of like the activities director of the cruise, I'm the captain.
That's for sure.
Chris Gehrz, you're the purser. Or is it purser?
I don't know what that does. But okay, we'll be right back to wrap up our first webisode of this year of online CWC. All right, time to wrap up this episode. Now, Sam, I should explain, if people have not watched, what is PTI? Because I would imagine at least half our students are sitting here thinking, what are they doing?
I kind of like the mystery to be there.
Well, let's pull the curtain back, because they'll explain why we're going to close the way
It's like a 20-year-old show on ESPN where they talk about the day's news. So we just use their visual format and music.
And some of the ideas we borrow.
Oh, absolutely.
So the way they always finish is to do the happy happies. So this is how we'll always finish our episode. So we're recording this, I should say, on May 28th, although you might be watching this sometime in June, all the way up to like June 19th is when the course actually starts. But as of May 28th, happy birthday to Kirk Gibson, who hit one of the most famous home runs in baseball history in his only World Series at bat in 1988. He is 62 today. Speaking of baseball miracles, Sam, as we record this episode, your Minnesota Twins are 36-17, 10 games ahead of the second place Indians. Prediction time, how many games will it take for the Twins to beat Gibson's Dodgers in the 2019 World Series?
Because I am a student of baseball history, I know that in 1991, the Twins were in the World Series and went to 7 games. Right. In 1987, they were in the World Series and went to 7 games. And in 1965, they were in the World Series
against the Dodgers
and lost in 7 games. Mm-hmm. So 7 is a mortal lock, right?
That seems like a good guess.
All right. Happy anniversary, Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Mm-hmm. That's sweet. On this day, in 1533, their marriage was declared valid by Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury.
When was your marriage declared valid, Sam? Did the Archbishop have to do that, or was that kind of just handled in the wedding itself?
I'm not sure it is yet, is it?
Well, time will tell.
All right. Alas, the story doesn't end well for Anne Boleyn. Oh. Did you know this, Chris, that she is beheaded by her husband for failing to produce a male heir? I don't know why I'm smiling as I read this. It is a gory story. So funny. Or it didn't end well for Thomas Cranmer either. He was burned at the stake 20 years later by the only daughter of Henry's first wife.
Well, that soap opera sounds great. I can't wait to get to Unit 2.
I believe it's been made as a soap opera multiple times, and I think it's coming again.
Really? If you're interested, watch Wolf Hall. That's my favorite version of it. Okay, happy trails to Belgian independence. On this day in 1940, have we mentioned we're history professors? On this day in 1940, Belgium surrendered to Germany as part of the Blitzkrieg. Speaking of World War II, this is all just about segues here. Sam, a week after we recorded this webisode, we're headed to Europe for a 10-day tour with a bunch of people on the world wars. What are you most looking forward to about that tour? This doesn't have to be Belgium. It could be something else.
Yeah, well, actually, it's some of the cemeteries in Belgium. It's taking some of the people that are going on this trip to see some of these places. But quite frankly, it's Normandy. I think everybody on the trip is really excited to see Normandy. We were there for the first time this January, and it's actually deeply moving. So.
I'm just excited to see Europe in June. We've been taking J-term trips for a few years now.
I heard it's nicer in the summer.
It's just slightly warmer, yeah. Okay, well, that's how we do CWC the Webisode /CWC PTI. Just a few reminders before we go. Number one, you're always free to email us. This will probably become more important as we go along and you have questions about readings, museums, course content. But you can always email us. Just email your small group leader or probably Sam by default, s-mulberry@Bethel.edu. Remember, you do have a couple of pre-term assignments. So the course officially starts Wednesday, June 19th. You'll have a film, you'll have a Martin Luther King reading, and an assignment for the next day. Before all that happens, you should watch this episode, so good job, you're already here. You should complete an online quiz. It's 10 questions. You can do it as many times as you want. It's just to check that you're familiar with the syllabus, schedule, study guide. And then don't forget that don't forget the discussion board question, which is basically introduce yourself, including your experience of online education, whether that's vast, shallow, none, a lot. Just tell us kind of what you've done online and what are some concerns or things you're excited about for online CWC. Sam, I think that was pretty good. We're already in mid-season form.
Yes. And to end the show, when you get to these museums, there should be no technical hang-ups, but there might be one thing, so I want to end the show by saying, allow flash.